This is my first visit to India, yes. The country is wonderful, although I have to confess that I'm experiencing most of it from inside a five-star hotel bubble. So I work for an NGO in the United States called the American Civil Liberties Union, which was founded almost 100 years ago, and it's the largest human rights and civil rights organization in the United States. We have offices in all 50 American states and more than 1,000 people around the country employed by the ACLU and 2 million members who pay dues to be members of our organization. And for 100 years we've been the leading NGO in pushing back against government violations of individual rights. Much more recently during the Trump administration, when Trump tried to block people from certain Muslim countries from entering the United States, it was our organization that sued the Trump administration on behalf of those people from around the world. I began work at the American Civil Liberties Union just 5 weeks before the 9/11 terrorist attacks. And so I've spent most of my career being involved in the fallout from that event. The Bush administration opened secret prisons around the world, decided to systematically torture prisoners, to kidnap them off the streets of their countries and fly them to dungeons. And so my organization stood up against all of those abuses. We were able to succeed in pushing back against those worst practices. Well, I think the simplest thing to say about Edward Snowden is that he changed the world, that we talk about before Snowden and after Snowden. And some of that is about legal changes that occurred, mainly in the United States. Some of it is changes that technology companies put in place as a result of his revelations. But most of all, I think we're talking about a change in consciousness. We're now more aware that we live in a world where almost everything that we do and say can be comprehensively tracked and stored by governments. That used to not be the case. It used to be that keeping track of citizens was very expensive, and governments had to have a pretty good reason for deciding whom to follow. And now surveillance has become so cheap and so prevalent that the default for most governments is just to record and store as much as they can about people who are not suspected of any wrongdoing. And I think that that change of consciousness as a result of Snowden's revelations will lead to long-term changes around the world. It's a fascinating event. You know, it's very easy to get trapped in our own national perspective, especially with Trump as president in the United States. We're so obsessed with everything he says and does and tweets and what's going to happen next that we forget that sometimes that there is a global context in which free societies are under pressure. And so to hear about the threats to journalists in Northeast India, to hear about how journalists are doing their work in Afghanistan and other places is a really rewarding experience for me. I'm so grateful to have been invited.